Will Flanders from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, the research arm of the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, joins me for another apples to apples comparison. This is a yearly comparison that you do between K-12 traditional public schools and independent charter and choice schools in Wisconsin. And here we are again, Will, with me saying, wow, for what, an eighth straight year, charter schools and choice schools vastly outperform traditional K-12 public schools. Win, win, win for school choice during this National School Choice Week. Great to have you, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, it feels like a broken record to some extent because we find similar things every year, but for some reason the traditional media doesn't seem to pick up on it, and they still keep saying we need more funding for traditional public schools. But we'll keep hammering it till it actually gets through. We'll see.
So let's stipulate this up front before we go even any further. What the left always says is that charter schools and choice schools cream the crop, and that would be against state law. You can't say unless you have this kind of performance aptitude, you're not allowed to come here. Or if you come from an impoverished troubled background, you can't come here. That's not. You can't do that. It's against the law, correct?
That's absolutely right. If a choice school has more applicants than they do positions, it has to be through a lottery. That's state law. There's no ability to pick and choose the best applicants. And the only schools in Wisconsin that do engage in something like this are some of the specialty public schools. Like, the only good performing schools in the city of Milwaukee tend to be those that actually do, in fact, have an application process and choose who can go into the schools. There are a couple other schools like that in the state as well. So something they don't really want to bring up too often.
Yeah, a competitive process to get into a public school that taxpayers are financing, a K-12 public school. But that's not part of the school choice program. Governor Evers always says we have to fully fund public schools. We have to fully fund public schools. But choice schools are public schools and charter schools are public schools because public dollars are used for these schools. However, when you compare the per pupil expenditure from state taxpayers for school choice versus the per pupil expenditure from state taxpayers for your traditional K-12 school, there's a huge, vast, cavernous difference between the two amounts of money.
Yeah, the gap has only widened in recent years through the pandemic with all the ARPA funds and things like that have come over the years. But right now we're looking at more than $16,000 on average per student in Wisconsin public schools. If you look at a class with 20 kids, that's over $320,000 of value sitting in every classroom throughout the state. Contrast that to our choice program, they're getting better outcomes and better results, as we found in our new report, spending less than $9,000 per student, and charter schools just over $9,000 per student. So we think there should be some effort to close the funding gap. That's one of the issues that we're supporting. But we're not trying to get all the way there, and we're obviously showing that more can be done with less, and the public school demand for more money should ring hollow.
All right, so almost half the money that you're getting for a traditional K-12 public school is going to school choice schools, and you're getting better results. And we're not getting a little bit better results. We're getting really dramatically better results. So let's talk about the apples to apples comparison here. This is pretty astonishing. Students in the state school choice program continue to outperform their public school peers. Proficiency rates in school choice schools were 8.1% higher in English language arts and 8.3% higher in math on average than proficiency rates in traditional public schools. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we looked at the forward exam for last year, and what we do with this report is we try to put all schools on a level playing field. So we know Wisconsin has a huge racial achievement gap, so we account for things like that. And when you do that, the choice schools are dramatically outperforming the traditional public schools. This is actually the biggest gap we've ever seen in this report. I think that goes back to the pandemic, and particularly with Milwaukee and Madison and school districts that were shut down throughout the pandemic. That gap has not been made up, and schools that were open, or at least tried to be open, like private schools in the choice program, they're showing dramatic differences over time as we see the sort of after effects of COVID.
So what is the difference here? What accounts, because we don't often talk about this, we talk about the results, we talk about the money, what accounts for these private school choice schools in the parental choice program and these independent charter schools? What accounts for such a dramatic difference in improved outcomes?
Yeah, so I think it's a challenging question. A lot of it comes down to the individual educators who are passionate and found these schools. They're not career bureaucrats. They're not teachers just trying to get by, and we're not trying to denigrate teachers, all teachers here, but they're led by entrepreneurs in education that have a great idea, and want to bring that to fruition. And contrast that to public schools, where often the person in charge of the school is just a career bureaucrat who's sort of moved up the ladder. So I think that's one of the big differences. Another key difference is, choice schools actually have the ability to teach morality. They actually have the ability to tell kids how they should behave, rather than simply just sending kids back in the classroom when they misbehave with no punishment. They have the ability to actually discipline students. So I think all of those factors contribute. There's many more as well, but those are some of the key ones that come to the front for me, at least when we go visit these schools and see how they interact with their students.
A couple of years ago, Will put out a study. I believe it was Will who put out a study that said, besides improved education outcomes in choice and charter schools in Wisconsin, independent charter schools, that is, then you are also seeing better outcomes in terms of less involvement in crime, better ability to get a job, to find gainful employment. There were all of these sort of non-educational, items that you had looked at. And if you're a kid coming out of a choice school, even from a really disadvantaged and tragic background, you have a better shot of living a life that seizes opportunity and affords you the rewards of that than you do if you're the same kind of kid in a public school.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just student proficiency, right? That's one thing, and that's something we're interested in. As an academic nerd, I enjoy that stuff. But for a lot of these families, the most important thing is, will my child be safe in school, right? And that's the primary goal. And once you establish safety, then there's more opportunities for learning. There's opportunities for, as you say, to sort of establish those moral foundations that will lead a student throughout their lives to not become involved in some of the bad things we see in our urban schools, but also in other schools throughout the state as well. So once you have that foundation, then you can sort of move on to all these other great benefits that sort of spill out from having a safe environment to learn, which I think is one of the key reasons a lot of families make the choices that they do.
So you don't have teachers bound to a collective bargaining agreement, so they're flexible, so they can do things sort of outside the parameters of a contract. You don't have the same level of chaos because discipline is the order of the day. So you don't have mayhem in the classroom. Obviously, that's going to let students calm down and concentrate. Is there anything about the way teachers present the material? Because I know we've had complaints for as long as I can remember that you have seen Common Core sort of destroy the ability of excellent kids to advance and get ahead, to have the slower kids catch up. Is there a direct instruction model that is typically employed in choice and charter schools that just sort of makes it easier to say, learn math?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it certainly varies, but I think there's certainly less emphasis on things like Common Core in most of our choice schools. And I think the reason behind that is families are actually making choices for schools that work best for them. So if you find a school that's not teaching math in a way that works for you, you actually have the opportunity to choose a different school, just like we would if we, for any other aspect of life. If we don't like our neighborhood, we have potentially the opportunity to move. If we don't like our grocery store, we can shop somewhere else. Schools for a long time have been the only exception to that in life, but now we're opening up those options as more and more families take advantage of school choice to find the educational model that works best for the kid. And I think that's another huge sort of benefit of educational choice rather than this one-size-fits-all model of traditional monopolistic public education.
So that you're stuck if you're in Madison schools and you're a Christian conservative parent, but you're being told that you're going to have your kid exposed to, deviant sexual indoctrination for an entire week. And you don't like that. Well, where do you get to go? You get to go to Middleton, but oops, they're doing the same thing probably. So why not make all schools? This is what makes no sense, is that school choice schools do better. The flexibility makes more sense. The ability to tailor an education to an individual kid. You've got the ability to actually discipline classrooms. You're putting disadvantaged kids at a net advantage for actually being able to escape from their conditions. Why not do this statewide?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we think is that all families in the state should have access to our educational choice programs. So right now we have arbitrary income limits in place that really squeeze middle-class families out of the opportunity to exercise school choice. You tell a family of four making $60,000 a year, they're going to have to pay tuition, which that's what the income limit is. It's absurd. Those folks can't afford that, and they're essentially stuck in their traditional public school. So we think raising or eliminating the income caps is the way to go. Make sure that all families in the state have the opportunities that we're right now limiting to a certain subset of the students in our state.
I think that makes complete sense, because right now the school choice program in Wisconsin is basically a poverty program. And you're outperforming public schools from a population of kids that typically are found at disadvantage in school generally. You're outperforming public schools with kids from, harsh backgrounds. That's incredible. That is incredible because that is essentially what the income limits demand.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason that we wouldn't think the benefits could be even greater if we open it up even more because, as you say, these schools are doing a better job with the most challenging kids that are in public schools, and the ones that public schools always say are the reason that we can't succeed, the reason our proficiency is so low. Well, guess what? Choice is showing that those kids can succeed.
There's a constitutional referendum question to put out there for people, and I bet you it would pass with 70% of voters, at least. Will Flanders, it's a really interesting report. I would read it if I were one of the listeners out there. I mean, please check this out, will-law.org. It's right there on the front page of the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Thanks. Great work, as usual.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You as well.